Hello and welcome to the Sabrina River Folk Podcast with me, Nicola Has. Tonight's guest is Sarah Dixon of Stroud. Sarah shares her incredible story to Goddess and how training in the Greek icon tradition led her to the 100 Goddesses project, and how the Severn Estuary wild environment reminds her of her childhood memories. So, welcome to the podcast, Sarah.
Hi, Nikki. It's great to be here.
Thanks for coming on. So if we could begin with, Sarah, if we could just talk, if you could let us know a bit about you and a bit about your background, where you grew up and your sort of how your connection with the Severn and with Sabrina, sort of where that came from.
Sure. So actually, my connection with Sabrina and the River Severn is quite recent, relatively. I moved to Stroud first in 2001, and then I moved back to London, which is really my roots, and then returned to Stroud again in, I think it's 2012 or so. So it's more recent. I grew up in Cyprus and also in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. I'm not a military family, but just a family. My parents liked traveling, living in different countries, so we ended up moving around. And so through that childhood, it was very, we moved a lot, but also we lived in incredibly strong natural areas. So I was able to experience mountains, deserts, beaches, oceans. There were so many kind of natural environments that we were visiting and living in. And I think that helped me to develop that connection. My mother's Irish, and she used to also encourage that a lot and teach us about the flowers, the plants, the land that we were living in at the time. Part of my experience in Cyprus was living in a small village, or at least not living there so much as a sort of, I suppose we had our home in the capital, and my parents found a small farmhouse near the sea and bought that as a holiday and summertime home. And near there was a beautiful river, and at night you could hear all the frogs calling and so many wildlife, different types of owls and creatures calling all night. So it was a very beautiful thing where there was almost no electric light. This is the 70s. This is a time when it was really felt quite remote and connected with the natural world. And so the starlight was incredible. These experiences made a huge impression on me as a child. I studied biology, probably as a consequence of this. I had a fantasy I want to be like a professor of nature or something like that. And but I also wanted to be an artist at school. I was sent to boarding school from these beautiful places, so that was a whole other story, which we don't need to talk about today. But it's also had a big impact on how I see the world. And I wanted to do art, but I was strongly discouraged because this school was all about, success and grades, and they thought I could do science. So I was strongly pushed in that direction. I was, clearly told that you can't do art. So that journey has been huge, to come full circle over all those decades through a career of sorts in biology. Certainly, I went to live in the Amazon. I worked in the Hindu Kush as a botanist. I got really immersed in that idea of understanding the natural world from the biological sciences perspective. But the art thing never would leave me alone. It never went away. And I thought even when I had a baby in my God, how do I not know this? 2013. That's my brain. So that I thought, well, that's the end of my fantasy of doing some art. I kept doing small art projects around my work, which eventually became as a graphic designer because I needed to be creative. But I thought, well, that will be the end of that. And in fact, what happened was if I only have 10 minutes a day to myself, it's got to be about art. That's the only thing I'm really passionate for. So that was anchored my resolve. And yeah, last year I finished an MA. So that's about 10 years on. I managed to get myself into an actual art course and program and study academically. And that's really enhanced my understanding. And that's in performance art. So I never knew that I would be a performance artist. I was always into painting, especially from Cypriot tradition. I learned icon painting
Mm.
on a summer school, and that's really informed my practice. I think my mother's Irish and Catholic background also brings that element of kind of sacredness, but she turned away from the faith, but she definitely had the love of the beautiful richness and the color and the sensation of incense and all that kind of theater of the church. And we saw that a lot in Cyprus. You know, the Greek Orthodox tradition is also full of that incredible ceremony and color and beauty.
Mm.
So I guess, you know, I'm talking about a lot of different things, but I think they weave together to kind of make sense of where I am now and how I've got into this position where I started to connect with Goddess as a spiritual path some years ago, maybe through working in the Silver Spoons Art Collective, where we were looking at the impact of the witch hunts on contemporary femininity and the female experience in society, how those stories of persecution still shape our experiences in some ways. And we formed a group of, I don't know, nearly 40 women, all making different kinds of work. And that started to become more of a spiritual path for me, where Goddess started popping up as an intention or a guide. And so through that, I then got involved in Stroud's new Goddess Temple and joined the priestess training. And this is running alongside my art practice. So now I'm bringing together performance, ritual, ceremony, but with a real deep land connection. I'm bringing in my love of nature with biology, and it's all starting to whirl together. And through that process, that's when I met you and learned about the goddess Sabrina of the River Severn. And that was a particularly impactful time, because that is such a powerful energy at that river. So much history that you're exploring in your podcast, but also just being there, just this presence of this huge force that is sense of wildness that I experienced as a child and in my young adulthood, and maybe find less easy to encounter within England, within the UK. It tends to be much more of a, for me, a more urban, even in a small town, it feels more urban than what I would have experienced in the past. So yeah, it was amazing to find that beautiful power and nature power.
Amazing. And that's so interesting because the Severn really dominates the landscape of this part of the world, you know. And obviously you're based now in Stroud. So do you find yourself quite inspired by the landscape of the Stroud valleys and then, you know, further into the Severn valleys?
I think although I was born in London, actually in Clapham, so near the River Thames, that's like a nature connection there that wasn't that conscious really, but it definitely is there. Um, I would say I moved to Stroud after I'd lived in the rainforest in Ecuador, and I was quite ill. And I thought Stroud, I'd heard and saw that there were artists here. This is quite a while back. This is like 2001. Artists and environmentalists, so people who are interested in nature and eco things, which is my jam, and also the art side of it, where I thought, oh, I could get quite a cheap studio as opposed to staying in London where I was. And I got a job here working in a bat research, it's like an ecological company. And I was like the bat person. And I used to answer the phone and tell people if they found a bat, how, you know, what to do, not to get scared, you know, take care, they're protected, you know, they're not going to hurt you, this kind of stuff. It's like counseling people. And so it was there, that nature thing, but I needed to be creative. So I started doing design work. And I think I've always thought that something about the landscape here, so it's really hilly. And it's quite interesting because in Cyprus, in the mountains, that's where the resistance fighters would hide when there were
Mm.
problems in Cyprus. They often get invaded over the centuries, really. You know, and we've got the Greek resistance to the British imperialism that went on there, the communists, and they used the mountains. Same in the Hindu Kush. You know, Afghanistan, one reason it's so difficult for colonizers to take it over is because of the mountainous territory. And although Stroud hasn't exactly got these incredible mountains, it is a knotty landscape. And I felt that creates this kind of slightly different habitat for different types of human, and that you can kind of hide in the crevices more. And it's harder to farm and turn into a kind of industrial landscape. Now, that's not to say I don't understand that there's a big industrial element here, which is taking the River Frome and using the power of that water to drive the mills and make the wool industry thrive. So there is that, but there's also these quite complicated lanes and things. It wasn't really until getting into the priestess training and learning with you about the Sabrina the Severn that I really understood how big the Severn is,
Mm.
impactful, and how dramatically different it is in that landscape to where Stroud is in the valleys on the edge of the Cotswold Hills. Then we dip down into that huge plain, that floodplain, and that's where I'm feeling the Thames connection. You know, London's also built on this huge floodplain and technically can easily return to the water. So there's that sense of the power in that. And then the Cotswold Hills on the edge where Stroud is like these hidey holes, and it's a very different kind of vibe.
And I love the connection that you talk about Cyprus, because I visited Cyprus as a child, well, as a teenager, and I remember the Troodos Mountains, isn't it, in Cyprus, and also visiting Aphrodite's temple and places like that. And I think we probably have this shared, somewhere in our subconscious, appreciation for the ancient goddess,
Yes.
that we recognized in that landscape, that we now see, you know, that we see and we feel in the Severn landscape, because you know they're very similar in that respect. So I completely get where you're coming from with that analogy. Absolutely. Yeah, so you know we've come to know each other over the last few years, and I know you to be a woman, a spiritual woman, and an artist. And what you do is you combine these two together so well. And for me, there's a particular joy in art that is motivated by spirituality and by goddess. You know, it's very powerful and very moving, and art often can relate a message in a way that words can't. So you can read a story or you can feel something from a picture in a different way to what you would with words. And I think that, you know, your work is absolutely fantastic and I really, really love it. So if you could just sort of go into a bit more detail about how the 100 Goddesses project began, and, you know, your motivations behind it.
So at that point, I had been part of the Silver Spoons collective and made work for that, a kind of ritual process with some family silver. And it was about like releasing ancestral harms. And through that project, I'd also started to get this message in some of the meditations about goddess. I was then invited into Hawkwood, which is near Stroud. It's like a big residential centre where they run all sorts of courses and they have the most beautiful buildings and landscape there, and they grow vegetables, and it's just a wonderful place. And they run artist residencies, and I was lucky to get one, and it was midwinter. So I started doing this deep journey with Hecate into the midwinter, which is a difficult energy. You know, a lot of people don't want to go into depression in winter. We're trying to find the sunshine. We're trying to survive it. We're trying to celebrate in the middle of it with our Christmas celebration to bring all the color and the fun and get away from this feeling of like, you know, it wouldn't be so many centuries where the winter, and even now, is a time when the death rates are higher. Like people die in the winter because it's cold and difficult to survive.
Mm.
So that's really challenging, but I needed to do that because I had some unresolved stuff that I needed to work through, and I needed to learn how to be in the dark midwinter, in the deep cold, and in the shadow time. So I took that residency as that opportunity, and I started to really intentionally connect with the earth and with the elements and bring that into my painting. And my painting practice was already drawing, as I mentioned, on the Cypriot traditions of icons and the idea of a church in the very hot temperatures. You go into the dark space for relief, for escape from this searing sunshine and heat. So it's kind of also gives you a sanctuary. So there's something sanctuary about this dark winter time if you can be with it in that way. And then you need this golden color to kind of give the brightness and give you the clarity to stay with the dark. So I drew on the icon painting tradition, which is obviously a sacred tradition. And when I learned about that some years back, I understood from my teacher something really important that is so different from Western art, from like Northern European art methods, our traditional, what we think of as kind of classical art in the galleries and National Gallery and this kind of thing. So it's really non-individualized. You're not to sign your pictures. You're not the artist. You're channeling spirit. You're channeling God
Mm.
through the painting. And also you have to copy. So you're copying an ancient tradition. So in principle, an icon of Jesus is an exact copy from 2000 years ago when the first painter painted Jesus from life. This is the idea, it's how the tradition has been taught. So we're copying for hundreds of years the same image, and we don't sign it. And the idea there is that also when you meet the painting, you are not looking at a painting, you are looking at Jesus or the saint who's in the picture. And then interestingly, also in Cyprus, we have that older tradition of gods and goddesses, and that's still extant. So there are shrines all over the island, and you can enter a shrine and find small wax effigies, which are the kinds of things people would have been doing again for millennia. Offerings of, here's my hand broke, or I have a problem, I'm arthritis, something like that. I put the item into the shrine and I pray to the saint, which I think formerly could well have been a god or a goddess. And so you've got this layering of these sacred objects. And so that's what I wanted to start to do. I wanted to bring the earth around me, the leaves, the materials, the spring water. There's a beautiful spring at Hawkwood. I just dedicated to using the spring water, the earth itself, and making using my colored pigments as well. I use egg yolk in my paintings to make the paint. That's also a very ancient icon painting tradition of egg tempera. It lasts for centuries. It's just a wonderful material. And so I was really going for that and bringing that sacred element into my work for the first time, consciously and explicitly. I wasn't just mimicking and learning about someone else's tradition. I was starting to create my own kind of drawing on that, but also drawing on my creative expression, intuitive and feminine approach to this kind of sacredness, which I'd not found. We have such a male dominated patriarchal kind of models of religion, and I really, really needed something else. So I started to make it.
Amazing. And, it says on your website that it's intuitive paintings exploring feminine power.
Yeah.
Did you get a sense of the power of each of these 100 goddesses as you were working through them?
Yeah, so some I have them stronger connections. So Sabrina, I can go to the river, meet Sabrina, as it were, in person. That energy is there, that river is there to really feel in a full body sense. And others I would read on the internet or read in books, and learn in that way. I might learn from teachers and build that connection. But it's trusting that each person has the goddess within. So I have the goddess within. So I can learn and get ideas, but I can also express that from within myself. And it's bringing that together. And the power aspect is what fascinates me about goddesses as well, in the way that it's so multiplicitous and you have so many traditions around the world and so ancient and contemporary versions, and people are constantly remaking what this is. It's less dogmatic than the dominant religions. And you could say it's like Hinduism is something like that. It's quite creative and they have these stories and legends and real complexity and multiple characters. I really relate to that, I guess, as a personality. I have lots of different aspects and I need to express that. And goddess in all these forms and more comes, it expands. So being a woman in the world can be very restrictive, and we get boxed in and we get taught that we need to be pretty or we need to be motherly or we need to, there are certain roles that are set out for us, and that is reinforced through religions, but also through, all kinds of academic structures, business structures, like governments, like everything is,
Mm.
and the way the medical system, that was all about males who, women were not allowed to become doctors, but doctors started making themselves important and charging money and replacing kind of shared community collective healthcare. And the women were actively excluded. So you couldn't take part in health and care. And unless you kind of were some kind of subterfuge, you know. So we need these goddesses to show us all the multiple aspects of being human, which are denied to certain types of body. And I'm talking about gender, but obviously we can go on into other aspects of identities and a whole other thing about that, which is something I'm really interested in. But I think, in particular, it opens up space for us to be more multifaceted. We have Kali, vengeful kind of justice goddess who's going to take no prisoners and chop your head off. And, we need that. We need to see the feminine power in so many different more aspects, and not just these kind of sanitized visions in the National Gallery of the Virgin Mother and her baby, and that's it. That's who she is. She can sit quietly and just be angelic for us. So yeah, it's a need to be allowed to be more than those preset roles.
And in terms of Sabrina,
Yeah.
what for you, could you give us some of your thoughts around what does she represent to you as a goddess? What are her qualities or attributes? And what elements did you incorporate into the painting? Obviously, it's a very sort of there's a lot of movement in the image, and that you've got fish and other elements in there. I'll share the image as well online. What did you do it at a particular time or moon phase? Can you give us some background to that particular painting?
So my understanding of Sabrina comes through the swirling and the moon. So to elaborate on that, the swirling means it's an estuary space. So you've got this very, very long river. I love the Welsh legend about the three sisters that come from the mountain, and she is the one who wants to meet the humans and travel through the cultural areas, the cities and bigger towns, and she takes her time. But as she comes down, because she's the longest river that comes from that mountaintop, she's also the most powerful because she's gathered the most water from all the land, right? So she's getting bigger and bigger. And then, of course, you've got the tide, and it's funneling up this little narrow channel. And so now you've got this huge swirling, right? This tempestuous turbulence that's actually very hazardous. And, as we've heard other people in the podcast talk about the dangers of traveling that space on a boat. And on foot, of course, people get trapped in the mud, and it's really hazardous. And to me, this is really fantastically important to be living in this very cozy Cotswolds zone. England is so kind of acculturated and full of facilities and efficiencies, and transport works well, and if there's a pothole, everyone complains, but it does get fixed. There's most of the world is not like that. If you're lucky if you've got a road of any kind at all. And we just have so much around us that is human and dominating, and so little of these natural forces. So to encounter this place where it's not dominated, where the humans have not really, they'd maybe causing some harm, as we heard, was it Steve England, the forager, talking about the way that the resources get pillaged, but it's still there, this own natural power. And of course the moon is important in that tidal aspect, so very, very connecting us to these cosmic energies, these big expansive universal forces of gravity through space, off the planet. And it just, I love that sense of power and energy that I get from that. And I love the idea that when we turn towards our challenges and our terrors, we can find support. So if I'm in a turbulent time, I'm struggling with something, I'm getting overwhelmed, I'm getting really pulled and pushed by different forces. Maybe it's weather, maybe, my shed is blown down, and then my kid is ill, and then somebody wants to cut my disability benefits. It's like a mess, right? And I'm trying to set up a business. These experiences I and others around me are sharing. this turbulence, whatever it might be, Sabrina can be there for you. You don't have to make it your enemy. You can befriend it through the goddess model. And so we can make offerings, right? Absolutely key part of the practice. Always offering gratitude, offering sacrifice. It could be candles, it could be incense, it could be small pebbles, it could be a shell, it could be a piece of food. We give something and we tap into what we know and ask for the guidance and support through the turbulence, and then we ask for Sabrina to help us with that. It works. You find your way. You can navigate the stormy waters, and then you can find the fruits. We know that the river provided so much fish, eels, all this abundance. People need these resources, and we need to tend them and be in right relationship with them in reciprocity, and come away from this pillaging and grabbing everything. And so that's another aspect of it. It's like, yes, it's terrifying. We might have an urge to want to dominate everything to feel safe, but safety doesn't just come from domination. Ultimately, we cause harm through that. It might not hit you in your lifetime, but it's coming as a backlash to us all. And we need to be in right relationship, and we need to respect and reciprocate and tend. And that's the human's right role for me. It's not that humans are bad and are doing it wrong. It's that some humans are making big mistakes that we all have to face, and we need to come together and negotiate how are we going to do this better. So that's what it's about for me. And so Sabrina has been so powerful in helping me find goddess energy in the UK, which I'd struggled with really hard, because I've had other experiences that I've had these kind of huge natural powers, and I'm thinking, where is it in this country? Like, everything's in a box. We're really disconnected from our food, from our landscape. I go out to see Sabrina and I'm like, yes, this is me as a full living animal in this land. And this is wonderful, wonderful experience.
Yeah, she has, you're absolutely right. She does have that untamed quality.
Yeah.
You go and you spend time with her, there is still a rawness and a wildness to her. She hasn't been tamed. Although, as I've said before, it is a landscape that's constantly under threat because
Absolutely.
people are always trying to tame her, much like them always trying to tame us women. But, she resists, and I think that's a good metaphor for us as women also, and yeah, I can see why she inspires so many women to come into their own power, and she acts as a conduit to do that, and many people have said to me that she's like a friend, or that she's healed them just by being in her presence, and I think that's really special. Yeah, I mean, what can you tell us anything about any of the other goddesses that inspired you sort of on a local level? I know Kuda of the Cotswolds was also one of your paintings as well.
So Kuda is my very first one. So when I was in Hawkwood, this was the first goddess that I painted.
Mm.
So she's quite special. I'm also dedicated to Kuda as my priestess dedication, Kuda and Hecate. And Kuda is the Cotswolds goddess. We know so little, but we just have these tiny fragments. So pre-Roman, people are not making things out of stone. They're not doing this kind of more heavy, permanent stuff. They're living, whatever the way they're living, everything is biodegrading, right? It's disappearing. And the Romans show up with their stone workshops, and people are bringing their local, and this happens all over the place where the Romans went. They would come to the stone workshop with their local god or goddess, their entities, and occasionally somebody would have enough money to pay the stonemason to make them a sculpture or a votive piece, for their home or their land. And so from this, we just have these tiny insights that there was some kind of fertility mother type goddess, and one piece has the word Kuda written on it. So we're thinking, okay, maybe there's a goddess from the Cotswolds. Maybe it's been also proposed by an academic that there's a link with the word Cotswold, that Kuda and Cotswold is a linguistic connection. I just find, again, it's a wonderful way to feel safe in the environment, because I can see the Cotswold chalk. I integrate it into my painting. I grind it in a mortar and pestle by hand and crush some stone. this is old fossils, this is limestone, this used to be under the ocean like millions of years ago, or how many hundreds of thousands of years ago. And I'm weaving it into the painting to bring me that sense that there's a natural force with which I can come into right relationship and good relationship with, and it's a wonderful, nurturing, nourishing energy that Kuda brings, and is the central goddess at the Stroud Goddess Temple, actually, as well, of the wheel there. So it's a kind of revival, I suppose, and we take part in that because it brings us something valuable, and we need this goddess figure, and we have to fill in the gaps a lot. So this is where my intuition idea comes. When I paint, I don't pre-plan, I just sketch, and then I basically color it in. And I use these pigments, like I say, I'll use spring water to mix the paint. I use stones and muds that I find, and I also use pigments from a resource from shops for artists, or actually house painting. Little tip: Green Shop in Bisley does dry pigments for making paint, and they're fantastic range of colors there, and tend to be cheaper than in the art shop. So I love doing the mixing, the making. That's all part of the fun. I get to sketch how I feel. I get to express that vision from internally. Like you said, we can't always put in words. There's loads that we can communicate visually and in an embodied way. The body is a hugely intelligent being, and so we let the body speak when we do intuitive drawing and painting. And Kuda just brings that really safe, nurturing energy with her Cotswold Hills, little streams flowing down, springs everywhere, almost like leaking hills. And then, of course, the wonderful farming land that it produces really good food and has nourished the towns in the area just through the wool and so on like that. So, yeah, very productive, very comforting energy, really different from Sabrina.
And I remember you, another part of your art project was, of course, we know that the River Frome has its source near Stroud, and it flows all the way down from the Stroud Valley as down into the Severn. It comes out into the Severn through all of its sort of trials and tribulations, and where it's been canalized and things like that in the past through the Victorian periods, things out into the Severn, where she joins the Severn, Sabrina, at Framalode. We've been there together. And obviously, Frome, the Stroud Frome being one of the tributaries of the Severn, you also did an art project around actually being in the water and filming the quality of the water. Because, of course, we don't recommend getting in the Severn, certainly at this part of the world, because of its tidal. But the Frome, you recorded some footage underwater and all sorts of things, and cold swimming. That looked really, really, really exciting stuff.
So that was part of my MA, and I wanted to bring this. I started to find a way to bring my ideas, my experiences into that type of art practice. So sort of in contemporary art frame, But it's for me, that was about. So our task was related to citizenship. And I thought, well, that's very Roman, actually, cities, it's like quite an empire thing. And I was really grappling with this. What is this citizenship? Because there's a wall around a city, and that's what defines it. And then there's people who are in and people who are out. And I thought, well, I'm into relating to nature through goddess archetypes. How about if I want to come into relationship with the river as a character, as a citizen? And what would that be like? So it started to provoke questions of language, like how do you talk to a river? Like how can you have some kind of exchange in language? And humans have all these languages, but how do we talk to something like a river? And the river is amazing because it's the quote I had was it's always and never the same. Like a river, I am always and never the same. So it gives this feeling of fluidity, that it's followed this path for millions of years. Like it's incredibly old, right? It's small and it seems really young, and its name Frome means sparkling, and I think that's because of this light, fresh energy. It's just come out of the hills up at Chalford, above up towards uh, halfway up towards Cheltenham, basically. I think it's a little bit up in the hills, and it trickles down and then it slowly gets bigger and bigger, but still a small river. Freezing cold because it comes out the earth. Really ancient, and yet so youthful. And the water itself, it flows past. Where does it go? It goes to the Severn, but then it goes out into the ocean, and then it sweeps up into the atmosphere, and then it pours as rain onto the rainforest in South America, and comes back, across the ocean in more thunderclouds or back in the sea. Who knows how long it's in the sea before it cycles round? Where will it go? It's just so dynamic. And you get that energy when you go in the river. You get this incredible burst of dynamic energy every time, like every day, every time. It's always got this incredible power, even though it's small and cute, And if you don't go in it, it's just a backdrop. It's just, oh, that's a pretty river, and there's the canal, and da-di-da, and I can walk along and enjoy the nature. But if you go in, you get a different feeling. So the way I've made my film is not about a pretty situation. It's about, what is it really, this energy. And one time I was filming, and it's like a shallow area. It goes maybe on a really full time, it could get up to my neck. I'm about 5'8". And a lot of it is so shallow you can't even swim in it because it sort of spreads out again. And there's just this little bit where it's a bit deeper and you can get in. And it feels quite safe. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm making friends with the river. And it knocks me down, I get a little bit of a battering. And it's very strong current in the middle there. So it's a little lesson, like have some respect for this creature. You might want to play, but does it want to play with you? And maybe it's going to get a bit rough. So yeah, that was a really interesting process. And I made a short film, which is on my website, and some text. I made a kind of essay about it. It was quite a creative process writing that essay. It's not a typical academic essay. If you have the stamina, you can read through that and see where I'm going with my thoughts. But I got so much from that project. It was amazing. Plus the whole thing of health, and I'm struggling with arthritis. This is wonderful health experience as well, to be in the cold water. And there's lots of people who are really enjoying that. But I think it's important to remember that nature isn't just there for us to have fun and get things from. I always make an offering when I go. I always pay my respects to the spirits of the place. I just feel like we've got to hold that respect really firmly in our consciousness when we encounter these natural forces.
Yeah, there's definitely a huge wave of women doing cold water swimming that has emerged in the last sort of, maybe coming out of COVID or whatever, that literally everyone I know is doing cold water swimming in their local rivers and things. And I think that's great because a lot of those groups are also the ones that are pushing for cleaning of the water so that it becomes clean enough to swim in, like Henley Mermaids and other organizations like that. So, with this kind of emergence of women wanting to be in wild water, cold water swimming, and that connection for health, physical health and mental health. And from that is coming the focus on the environmental impact of the pollution and stuff. Again, this is almost like the goddess is working through us, isn't she? To clear the water and to keep the earth healthy. And I think that there is so much synchronicity with water. It's just always amazes me.
Yeah,
I will definitely post your film. I think I posted it when it came out, but I'll post it again because I love the difference of filming under the water as well as, above the water. That was really interesting. Yeah.
it's designed to be watched, very immersive, and it can be triggering if you've had
Sure.
negative experiences. So I always give that warning because at its most strong, it would feel like you're going in, and it's quite a fast current and so on. So it's quite full on, and it's not like I say, it's not prettified. It's about the real, and I'm trying to find something a bit more actually what's really there and not these fantasies of nature that we project. And so yes, as you say, like humans become channels for these forces, right? So we can learn to do that and become the active agent who cleans it up. Like our own immune system can go around the the white blood cells are running around like gobbling up nasty things that are coming in and maybe going to cause a problem for the body. And we can be like that too. We can go around and gobble up dirty things out of the river and yeah, be the cleaning agents. So I quite like that idea. To allow to offer your body in that service is a beautiful idea, and I think in return you can bathe in this water, and it also gives you a gift back. So
Oh, definitely.
we're helping each other out, and we're taking care of each other, and that's what's the most beautiful thing.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah. So, what does the future hold for you now, Sarah? I think you've got a exhibition coming up in Stroud.
I do.
Um,
So yeah,
yeah, could you let us know all the details of that?
sure. So we're going to have some of the goddess paintings at Star Anise Cafe, which is right in central Stroud. That's up on my website now, 100goddesses.life. And I've also got a kind of more wider practice website, sarah.dixon.studio. Star Anise show, it's not a full 100 goddesses. I had a show back in 2022 with the whole 100. This time it will be a selection, and there'll be some new ones as well. So I've started painting again. I'm doing a commission right now of Caradwen for a beautiful woman out in oh, my memory. I think it's Sheffield. And and so I'm excited. I'm back in my painting. I've finished the MA. I've trained as a priestess. I'm now ready to come back to it with new layers of depth and new possibilities. So it's thrilling, and I love to see you at Star Anise. So I'm going to see if I can organise a little party. And I'm also going to be starting to publish more. So I'm going to put out some colouring pages. I'm going to put out some more prints, get myself a bit more organised around this. And I also want to start teaching. So I want to run some workshops on painting extempore, intuitive painting, and goddess painting. Those are different things, different ways for people to encounter what the practice, but not everybody wants the goddess vibe. They necessarily aren't into it. So I will offer that for those who really want to make their own goddess, but I'm also going to be just showing basic extempore, which is in itself a wonderful and ancient, beautiful, very natural, organic technique.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that you incorporate the natural elements of the environment into the painting. I think I might have to book in for one of those paint with Sabrina
Yes.
using
Oh, I love that.
Sabrina some water from the river and things. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. But
Yeah.
also just allowing people to their goddess that's to be expressed, and I think that's a lovely thing. So, and I'm excited that you're doing new goddesses. So you mentioned there Cadwyn. What are the
Yes.
new goddesses? Can you tell us any more?
So I like to continue to learn more. I mean, I could do 1,000. I'm thinking that's in
Yeah.
the back of my mind at some point. Like, can I have 1,000 goddesses show? I also make my own. So I've got like the goddess of shame. So
Mm.
valuable in some of these heated online conversations where actually there's often shame hiding in the background, and if we acknowledge, it's like with the turbulence, if we confront and acknowledge our situation, goddess can help us with that. So goddess of shame loves our hot cheeks. She wants to help us take that up. It's an offering, and we can then start to see, where is my shame that I've done something wrong and I need to address, and where is someone else putting it on me and it's not actually mine and I need to firmly reject it and send it back. Goddess of shame helps us with that. Goddess of disappointments. I'm thinking also, goddess of motorways, because we spend so much time on a motorway, or I do much more than I'd really like. And I think, there are places where we're not bringing that, and we can, and it can really help us like navigate the world more safely, literally and spiritually and emotionally. So yeah, I'm bringing my own ideas into this, and also tapping into traditions that exist, the ones that I want to learn about. I'm just developing a slightly different technique as well. I'm working on wood, which again is an ancient icon painting method, but it makes things a little bit more solid, a bit more kind of fancy. The first collection was all on paper. So just taking that little bit more time, a little bit more design, and then offering out options for other people to get involved as well. So I'm excited for the new phase.
Yeah, and I think that it reminds me somewhat of the joke that the Romans had a god and a goddess for everything,
Yeah.
and we probably came from cultures that were incredibly multi poly polyes poly
Yes.
what's the word? It'll come to me.
Polytheistic.
That's it. Um, to then suddenly have everything combined into one masculine god to represent everything. And now we're understanding actually that we need that expansion. And I think you're absolutely right in capturing all of those elements within these different goddesses. It's really exciting. And I'm obviously just pleased that Sabrina is one of them.
I absolutely love Sabrina Goddess. I love painting Sabrina. It's actually up in my top 3 favorite paintings from my own collection. So I'm really happy with that one. And it's because the reason is because I had such a good connection, and that's what makes me paint better. So you can tell from the quality of the painting how good my connection is with that goddess, basically, in my view.
Oh.
You know, everyone views them differently. So I'm not going to make there's some kind of fixed idea about that, but I'm really happy with that one. And I love Sabrina so much, and I can't wait to go back and have more encounters.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and telling us all about that, Sarah. And I very much look forward to seeing how things develop in the future.
Thanks, Nikki. I'm so happy to have been here. It's been really lovely to be able to chat. Thank you.
Many thanks to Sarah for joining us on the podcast this evening. Sarah is very active across her socials, so please do check out her websites and her Facebook page. Also, please do go and see her exhibition at Star Anise in Stroud, starting on the 12th of April.